Zoom then. Great, super. So we'll begin now our session looking at this topic. So it'd be great to have you feeding in as you've already been doing. So thank you by using the chat to share ideas and comments and thoughts and reflections. That would be great. So I think you already know, but I'm Sarah Holmes from Liverpool Hope University, and I'm involved in researching children's faith and seeing how we can equip and empower the church, really. And so this session now is for us to think about together, how can we equip and empower grandparents through church life? Okay, so we'll dig in together now. So I've just asked you, as we were just before we were starting properly, to tell me, what have you seen? What do you see in church life? What's your experience of that? And so people have been popping things into the chat, which is wonderful. So I'm just going to read through some of those now, but it'd be interesting for those who've not been able to find the chat function. So it'd be interesting for you to just be kind of pondering, because sometimes I think we don't have time and space to reflect and think. So it'd be good to do that now. So some of you have been saying that most of your congregation are grandparents. Some people are saying the age group of our congregation means that many of us are. So that's sort of same idea. Majority of the congregation are grandparents and would like some advice. Yeah, that's interesting. We also get a lot of grandparents to our toddler group, and that's interesting. Because I know many grandparents now are involved in the childcare, looking after on a day-to-day basis their grandchildren, so therefore may well bring them along to toddler groups. So that's a really great opportunity to connect there. Grandparents very active in church life, including helping with the kids programs. That's wonderful. I just love the intergenerational aspect of church, that we can have that generations supporting others in their faith journey. Is great. We run grandparents and toddler groups, which is well attended. Super. Grandparents are active and helping in church life, very involved in toddler groups. Super. In South Africa, a few grandparents bringing children to church because the parents are not involved in church, and I think that's something that we do see quite a bit. Perhaps faith skipping a generation and grandparents able to do that. We've established a grandparents group once a month, speakers as often as we can, and it's well attended. Yeah, lovely. We have lots of grandparents involved in childcare. It's really great to hear these experiences here, and many of you very much connected with grandparents. So let's think then, just get rid of my chat screen. Let's think then about how we can support these people that we're working with. I've put some Bible verses in this. I think they just really help to set the scene and help us to think about this theologically. Why is this matter? Why are we talking about this? And so this passage in Psalm 78, we will not hide from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. And so for those who have faith and want to share that and pass that on to the next generation, it's just really exciting to be able to do that. So I mentioned this in these sessions now. I spoke in my research with church representatives. What was their experiences of working with with grandparents, and there was this sense of, I've mentioned these quotes here, huge significant value in this. There was a lot of talk about fondness for the grandparenting age range, but there was and somebody said, actually there's an assumption that children always want a high energy person running around very fast, very loud. Actually, many children really appreciate that stable, reliable, secure, quieter presence. And actually, this person was saying to me, it's great when we see sort of grandparent generation really actively involved in the faith life of our church and supporting children in their journey, because actually that's just so valuable for children in their faith journeyings. And so there were specific things churches mentioned, so messy church and open the book, all kind of easier opportunities because they're set up and ready. But actually these participants who were talking to me were saying, actually, what are some of the other ways that we can think about church life? And also talking about a grandparent substitute in our church life. you know, for children in our churches who don't have grandparents who are Christians. They don't have grandparents who live nearby. But perhaps the other way, for people who are in our churches of that sort of generation who don't have grandchildren or don't have grandchildren nearby. So it's not only, I think, in our church culture, in our churches, thinking about biological grandparents as such, but you know, how do we see this interaction more across the generations? And I think there's so many opportunities for that. And all of these comments were really pointed to that we needed to do more to increase the awareness of that huge worth and potential of including and empowering more activity of this and involving more in the church context. This passage here, very familiar to you, I'm sure, Deuteronomy, this sense of it's through daily life that these commands being given and to impress them on the children, talk about them at home, when you're walking along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, symbols around, and this sense of everyday life. So thinking about our church life, our congregations, how can we, just as part of what we're doing of our church daily life, how can we intentionally empower grandparents? How can we say, you know, just as we're kind of going about our business, how can we involve them more? So we'll talk about that in a moment. And this is one of the passages I love a lot to talk about when we're talking about passing on faith, when they'd crossed the River Jordan and they each got a stone and kind of built a tower and said, this will serve as an idea. And what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them the stories of what God has done for us. And I think one of the most powerful things for grandparents, for that generation in our church, is to hear their stories and to say, here's a memory, you know, of, you know, this is a Bible that I was given when I was 10 years old, and God has spoken to me through this, this, and this. Or, you know, here is a special bookmark that somebody gave to me on this occasion, or this Bible verse that I wrote out at this time reminds me. And those like the stones in this Bible passage of saying, actually, this is where God, I encountered God, or God helped me, God brought me close to him. And sharing those stories with children is just so powerful. So I think one of the things we can do is encourage grandparents to say, what are some of those memories? What are some of those marker points, those events that you can share as part of our church community, whether grandparents or otherwise? Just let's hear those stories of faith and these kind of marker points, which are so real and so tangible to children. Many of the grandparents who I spoke to, so the representative, spoke about obstacles. And so I think as we're talking about this, about how can we support and equip more grandparents in our congregations, it's important to think, what are the obstacles? And so here are some of the comments that people said. Talked about safeguarding puts people off. Some of the grandparents said to me, I couldn't go and talk to children on a Sunday in my church because of safeguarding. Whereas actually, I do various bits of safeguarding training all over the show, and it's important, of course, that we have policies in place. But I think it shouldn't be a barrier to completely cease intergenerational interactions. And so I think doing some kind of safeguarding awareness for the whole congregation, so that we all know what is and isn't okay to do, what are the kind of, you know, if we're in this open space all together and we're sort of chatting together, what, just to have that awareness, so that that completely removes that as a barrier. And then actually everyone feels like, oh yeah, well, I can step into this state of church life in this way. And then that was kind of closely followed by this statement here. Somebody said, I think they're a generation who feel that they're not permitted to or not allowed to. And that sense of, I don't want to sort of step over the line. And so again, having these conversations in our churches are really important. What is permitted? What do we want these generations to be doing in our church life? So important. This, and that ties closely with this thing, I don't want to cause offense. So having those conversations. And then many, some spoke here about lacking confidence in those kind of informal scenarios too. But then also some saying they're happy to answer those questions or discuss faith if they're asked, but they don't want to instigate that themselves. And if that's the case, if we've got our churches filled with people who feel, yes, I'm very happy to talk, but only when somebody asks me, then actually let's go and ask and let's start those conversations. Let's discuss this area of grandparenting with our congregations. Talk about, this is the clarification of the boundaries, and talk about ideas of what we can do. So here are some, I showed the kind of I showed in the session, because I think we need to kind of address this in many different ways as part of our church life. And so first I'll dig, so I think kind of I've done it as concentric circles, this idea that at the very core, we need to think about how can we resource and equip grandparents in that faith context so that the grandparents who are coming to our churches feel they can go back into their church context equipped and they've got the resources and know what they can do. And then sort of slightly wider than that, how can we empower these grandparents in our churches? So we have these people who are wanting and actively in this amazing relationship that I already spoke about, but with grandparent, grandchild, they've got that amazing relationship. How can we support them in using that to share their faith with their grandchildren? But what about our general ethos? What's it like? What does it feel like being a grandparent in your church? Does it feel that actually we're on the margin and we don't really want to say anything, we don't know what we can do? Or does it feel like actually we're talking about this all the time and we're very open and we're valuing greatly what's going on? So really thinking about our ethos. When we have events and activities, are we verbally and explicitly including grandparents when we talk about families there? And then thinking wider again, what about how are we showing that we value and affirm grandparents fundamentally as part of healthy? Often it may be that grandparents are feeling on the periphery, on the margin. This is what my research was very much showing. And so how can we embrace? So I'm going to dig into these three sections now. I haven't typed things here. So feel free to, again, type into the chat as for each of these three areas as I talk through, type ideas, because the purpose of this is to be sharing ideas. I've got some things I'm going to talk about, but please do feel free to type your ideas for each of these three things that I'm going to spend a few moments talking through now. So how can we, as churches, better resource and equip grandparents? And so one of the things is recommending books. I highly recommend this book here, as I've read it. It's really practical, but also really helps people to reflect on what is my role as a grandparent. What can I say if this happens or this happens, various different scenarios, and so many kind of things to think about and to help grandparents to feel confident in their own faith story, so they can then communicate that. So this is one book. There are many other books as well, but I would suggest that if you're thinking about this in your churches, to get a few books and read them, because sometimes it's tempting to recommend books that we've not read, but we don't know if they're particularly helpful. So it's really good to find a couple of books that you think are really helpful and read those every now and then as part of your church activities. What about coffee mornings? I think somebody mentioned this in one of the ideas in the chat. Coffee mornings or evenings, whatever, or tea mornings. We seem to be tea drinkers here today. To discuss some issues. You know, what do I do if I never see my grandchild? Has anybody got any ideas of what I can do? And perhaps some people were talking in the focus group in research, send letters, tangible things, or little postcards, bookmarks, sending little gifts, which put faith into the kind of the world of their grandchild. But thinking about that, getting people together who are grandparents and enabling that peer support, that peer conversation. It was really sad to hear some of the grandparents in my research saying, well, I don't think I could actually be honest about what's going on in my family with my grandchildren, because I think people would judge. And that's really sad to hear. Because I think the church should be the place where we can go and be beyond. So that in your church setting, how can you foster that culture, perhaps provide that environment where actually grandparents can peer support one another in a real way? You know, this happened in my family. Could you pray for me? Could you pray for my grandchild? They've got exams. They've got this really tough situation going on. So how can we foster that sense of peer support? Maybe even doing a few sessions, some kind of course about how to help grandparents to share their faith story, to become confident that actually I do know my faith story and I can express it in this way. And that may be just very informally, but it may be that you get hold of a course and do that formally. But in some way, think about how can you equip. Interestingly, some of particularly the granddads that I spoke to, just felt they were very low in confidence because they hadn't been as involved when their own children were at home and they were raising them and so on. And so now with their grandchildren, they feel perhaps a little bit out the loop and, oh, do I actually have a role to play in this? And realizing, interestingly, as part of my research, that was a big realization for them, that I do have a role to play in this, and they were excited about that. So even just having those conversations is so powerful. And with that in mind, every now and then when you have a church newsletter or something, having a look at this, the story of a grandparent that's, got a few ideas of what they can do, or perhaps suggesting a few questions. Here's a question you could discuss with your grandchild, or you could discuss your favorite Bible passage with your grandchild. So just dropping these things into your church newsletter or email or whatever it is, however you communicate. What about if you're running events in your church? A holiday club's coming up, perhaps saying, grandparents, we'd love you to invite your grandchildren to this event. So in that way, really making it very explicit that as part of the conversation that grandparents are involved and so on, but to give them the tools. And I think to discuss openly some of these difficult scenarios. So if I'm a grandparent, but my children are not active Christians, how can I how should I navigate that? Because I want to talk to my grandchildren about faith. So discussing that kind of in a peer support sort of way is so, so powerful. That thing, isn't it? Often just by talking these ourselves. So, but also what about the boundaries? It was interesting. Some of the group participants said to me, I can only ever pray with my grandchild if they come to stay for a sleepover. Or if my child, the child's parents, isn't there, I don't feel able to pray. Well, why is that? What's that about? Often, these were in cases where the children were active Christians. So just discussing this and exploring this issue of boundaries with our grandparents, I think, will be really equipping for them. I'm just going to have a look in the chat. I think people have been busy typing. So here we see the church is more dependent on grandparents. Yeah, absolutely. Talked to a group about the spirituality of children. Yeah, absolutely. So helping grandparents just think about this. What do they think and believe about a child's capacity to have faith? Because often perhaps we may not have thought about that. Having a service of celebration and blessing for grandparents, that's lovely. 2 grandchildren go to a Catholic school. They have specific grandparents assembly or a mass a couple of times a year. That's just lovely. They get about 200 grandparents or more coming. And then the Shaman school. That's lovely. Absolutely. And one thing, Care for the Family do this big extravagant faith-filled feast idea, which I'm hoping to do as a kind of a tea party for grandparents to bring their grandchildren to. And what you get is kind of a big mat, sheets like an A3 piece of paper with loads of activities and discussion things that you can have as a placemat on the table. So the grandchild can talk about this while they're having their tea. So that's a very simple kind of thing that also you could do. So I'll just move on to look at this second sort of area, this thing of how can we empower grandparents in the local church? How can we change specific tools and equipping? But what about the ethos? What about what we're doing? I think the biggest thing is to talk about it, to just be saying in our congregations from the front, yeah, well, we're praying this week for families. Let's make sure we actually say the word grandparents as part of that, you know. So in our prayers, we'll pray for grandparents when we're up at the front. How about a prayer meeting for grandparents to come together to pray for their families? And also for the wider congregation to pray for grandparents' families, so that there's that sense of teamwork. I've mentioned the tea party coming along together, but really thinking about that. How does it show through the activity of what we're doing that we really, really value grandparents as what we do? Perhaps those activities like what somebody's put there about the assembly, you know, inviting grandparents. So often we say, oh, it'd be good if parents come along, but we don't say grandparents explicitly. So it's great to do that. And chat mats, somebody suggested there in the back. And well done. Super. So yeah, so keep typing the ideas there. I'm just going to move on to the next third thing here, in terms of in our communities really embracing grandparents and substitute grandparents, pseudo grandparents, whatever we might want to call them, but that kind of sense of how can we be more authentically that intergenerational community as part of a church. And I just love the notion of intergenerationality of church, because it's that role modeling. You know, as I have children myself, and I can say all sorts of things to them at home, but when they see other people living out their faith, and perhaps at times it's hard, perhaps they see people who are unwell or going through life's challenges, but still having a faith, and how they respond to that, how they pray, how the church prays for those people. To see that lived out is just so powerful for children. And so that sense of role modeling and having that what we do is really key. So I think thinking in our churches, how can we facilitate that role modeling? Going back to some of those barriers and obstacles that perhaps are felt, how can we in our churches say it's great to see you role modeling? You know, how can we set up some perhaps a few minutes on a during a service to say, right, go and find someone who's in a different generation to you and tell each other something you want to pray about, something you like prayed for this week, or another week, you know, go and find someone of a different generation and hear their favorite part of the Bible, and just 2 minutes tell each other that. And suddenly we're breaking down the boundaries from having you know, different ages segregated, sitting in different parts of the church. It's just so powerful. So facilitating conversations as part of the church service. I already mentioned earlier, having those tangible stories. So perhaps asking, you know, as part of maybe our services where we have all the ages together, asking some of those older generations to come and to show us their Bible that they've had for many years, and talk to us a little bit about why it's so important to them. Tell us some of their favorite verses. Have they got an object that's memorable to them for some reason? They can come and tell us that story. And likewise, ask children and parents and all the different ages to be doing similar, so that we're really modeling as part of our community of church this sense that we want to hear each other's stories. We want those connections. What about facilitating perhaps buddies with families? So there's this concern about safeguarding, and of course we need to be aware of that. So I wouldn't particularly recommend partnering up sort of an adult with a child, but perhaps we could partner up a family together with some from older generations and sort of say, you know, do you want to have them around for tea sometime, and just kind of build relationships in that way? Or, you know, how can we kind of think about in your context, how might that work for families, family units to be kind of connecting in with generations in our church? And it's great to hear many of you saying that that sort of grandparent generation are involved in your children's work. That is just wonderful, because as I've been saying, the role modeling there is just wonderful. But it's just great to see that lived out. But for some people, people might feel, actually, I don't know if I can serve in the children's ministry. I don't feel equipped in that way. So actually, again, as part of our church culture, trying to empower those people and say, no, could you come as a guest sometime and just tell us your faith story? Perhaps occasionally we're having some sessions in our church this year, a baking session. Deliberately, I've done it so that some older congregation are going to come along and we're going to do some baking with the children, simple sort of things. And whilst we're doing that, I'm going to ask those congregation members to talk to the children about their faith, and the children will ask them questions, and we'll see that lived out. Or are there other opportunities, perhaps craft sessions, card making in advance of Christmas? Because could we have a session where some of these grandparents sort of age group will come and take part in activities with our children? So all the time sort of thinking, how can we break down those generational barriers and those kind of age segregated things so that we can just see more modeling, more interaction, more activity across the generations. And by doing that, I think that will absolutely enrich our church life, but it will also have this side effect of equipping and empowering grandparents to go off into their own family, hopefully, and to be more active in terms of supporting faith in that way. So they're just some of my ideas. I'm just saying, yeah, kitchen table project. Somebody's put, so thanks for that. That's where you would get the faith-filled feast things. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Also, just to mention to you, these two events, I can pop that in the chat. I think I've got the link. Yeah, hopefully that will work. Yeah, there we go. So this is Children Can organization. They've been putting these on for a little while now. They are evening Zooms about twice a year, gathering grandparents, and I've been to a couple to share some thoughts. But I know Becky is in fact going to the next one, and I'm at the one in October. But they're lovely evening sessions on Zoom. There's maybe 30 or 40 grandparents all over the country coming and talking and getting some ideas. But then we go into breakout rooms and there's genuine discussion and deep discussion about things that are actually going on. So really, really supportive. So I'd recommend that. Go along to that, but also share that with others that you know about. So we're just coming to the end of our time. So I was just going to pop this on as a kind of a reflective comment, really. Just to ponder then, what changes could you make in your setting to equip grandparents for their role in nurturing their grandchild's faith? Perhaps to change culture and the ethos of what it feels like in our churches to be a grandparent. What changes could you make, perhaps for yourself individually, but also what changes could your church make? Because I honestly think that this whole area of grandparents is hugely overlooked. And when we've got these struggles and challenges in society, if not much faith around and not many people volunteering for things, we have this hugely untapped resource. So well done for coming today. Well done for thinking about it, and just keep pondering, keep thinking, keep praying. What can you be sort of doing? What little changes could you make which actually could be very impactful? And going back to that Deuteronomy passage about daily life, I don't think we have to put on loads of extra events to support grandparents. I think it's changing the culture of what we do, changing that sort of ethos of what we're doing, and wanting to sort of just bring about a different way of working together so that we can see grandparents much more empowered. So that was all I wanted to share with you. I think we've got just 1 minute before we get booted back into the main meeting. So if anybody wants to type any questions there, feel free. I'm very happy if anybody wants to email me as well, you know, with anything afterwards, that'd be great. I am wanting to continue researching this topic, so if anybody wants to chat to me about that, do so. That would be great. Just typing my email address if that's helpful. So thank you so much, and well done for all that you're doing. And I look forward to hearing about lots of continued developing and working with grandparents. So I think what we'll do now is, yeah, we've got 10 seconds and then it will pop us back into the other room. So